Hello there, you awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage to truth and freedom. Wherever you're watching us, remember, the whole show is only exclusively available on Rumble, especially when you're talking about war. What is it good for? This is a world where power and profit overshadow the pursuit of peace. Joining me today for this special are three of the most insightful minds in the field. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and my dear friend, Seymour Hersh.
That's one of the reasons I think the CIA is a very dangerous community, but is presidents love wars because they're good for ratings. Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
What's your hat?
It's probably attention-seeking on some level, Seymour. I've come from the world of entertainment, probably haven't entirely let go of the idea that I'm a sort of a physical representation of the radical stance that I take in my own journalism, one journalist to another. Jeffrey Sachs, the world-renowned economist and a man who pulls a face that makes me love him so. If that's what he does when he's asked a tricky question, what does he do when he...
What they're doing, more war, more war, more war. That's all they want. They don't ask anymore. Nothing. Not a word.
Aaron Mate, the man the Ukraine government asked the FBI to blacklist.
The FBI, acting on behalf of its counterparts in Ukraine, asked Twitter to censor a whole list of accounts and also hand over their information to Ukrainian intelligence. My name was on that list.
This is a world where power and profit overshadow the pursuit of peace. When Donald Trump and Noam Chomsky are singing from the same hymn sheet, when Cornel West and Tucker Carlson agree, there is a machine at the heart of our culture that fires the conflict of war. Is the military-industrial complex. First, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and my dear friend, avuncular curmudgeon Seymour Hersh, lifting the lid on the Nord Stream pipeline from the comfort of his armchair. It's an honor to have you, Seymour. Thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be here, I think. Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
What's your hat?
It's probably attention-seeking on some level, Seymour. I've come from the world of entertainment, probably haven't entirely let go of the idea that I'm a sort of a physical representation of the radical stance that I take in my own journalism, one journalist to another.
I don't know if the word radical is the right one, but we'll let that one stand.
You want me to take the hat off because I'll do it out of respect for you and your prize.
I don't want to see what's there, but I will tell you something. I was fascinated, as I told one of your aides just a minute ago, by the Condoleezza Rice quote, and my pay for this this performance here will be. Somebody send me a link to that.
We will send that to you.
It's you're ahead of the curve with that idea, but that's been a prominent theme in the American conversations about oil. And it is a fact that Norway, which did help us, has more than doubled the amount of oil, natural gas rather, is shipping now to Western Europe. It had about 9 or 10%. It's way up. And so you can never cut out mercantile interests. But there were probably much more immediate interests, the war in Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a fascinating point that you were making. Anyway, so I got something out of this, so I'm happy.
Look, can you stop being so generally cynical about my hat and the entire experience of this interview? I got something out of it. You don't need to overplay the I'm a well-worn journalist, I was around during Watergate, I've got a Pulitzer Prize. I get it. You're senior, you're world-weary, you've become cynical about establishment power.
No. It's much more ephemeral than that. It's just, it's amusing. The hat is amusing. I don't think there's anything profound in me talking about it. It's what I see.
Sir, firstly, I will credit Gareth, who makes the show with me, for his research that led to our use of the Condoleezza Rice clip. And our general approach is to challenge the dominant narrative that we are given through mainstream media, which once was the domain of ordinary investigative media, which seems to have become deeply sanitized in the last 20, 30 years. Increasingly, we're seeing, whether it's Chris Chris Hedges or Glenn Greenwald or yourself, journalists that have been prized for their investigative work being, if not demonized, certainly subject to something amounting to smears. The White House has already denied your story, and I'd like to ask you what you think has happened to journalism in the last 20 or 30 years, and why we are not presented with complex narratives that undergird reporting with the kind of economic, financial, military and geopolitical interests that usually lead to events like the Ukraine-Russia conflict, or indeed an event, sort of broadly speaking, within the remit of that narrative, like the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage.
Well, I think one of the problems, look, you're asking, you're throwing the ball to me. This is all I brood about a lot, because I worked at the New York Times in the 70s and had a great time, was never sort of blocked from writing stuff. And it's a different world now. Oh, come on, stop it. But anyway, the bottom line is that I think what a secret source now is for the people, many of the people who write for the major newspapers, is a press secretary who, says, come over here, I'll tell you something a little different than I've told the other guys. I just don't understand why they're not jumping on certain stories. Certainly this story is, I could just tell you, a friend of mine, I have a wonderful old friend who escaped from the Middle East, became an oil man, became very rich and very happy, living in France now. He wrote me after the story, and he said, oh, Cy, he said, my nickname, he said, you have become a master in the deconstruction of the obvious. I mean, what was so hard about this story? We know Russia didn't do it, because if they wanted to, they could turn a valve. And so I guess, is Macedonia a member of the NATO? Maybe they did it. Where do you go for the next possible suspect? Who is it? It's clearly us, since the president basically said it. But the bigger question is, what's going on with journalism? I don't know. My old newspaper, the New York Times, for which I did all sorts of stuff on the CIA and Watergate and Vietnam for them, hasn't touched the story. Neither has the Washington Post, which is the two great main sheets. I don't think the Wall Street Journal has. The rest of the country, some people have. It's just like a blank. It's like, it could be as simple as we're coming off the Trump years, and we made big divisions in the media. We're either going to be for or against Trump. It could be the same sort of dichotomy plays out. We're now in the Trump corner. And if we write something critical of we're now in the Biden corner, rather. If we publish something critical of Biden, we might be leading ourselves open to more Republicans. The guy in Florida, et cetera, DeSantis. I don't know what the fear is, but it can't just be about the fact that I don't name sources. I spent 9 years at the New York Times writing about the CIA going after Allende and going and all that stuff, killing people abroad without naming sources. I mean, either trust what I do or you don't.
Yes. I know that you also wrote about Abu Ghraib, significant revelations there, and about the mass murders in Vietnam of civilians. And the banalization of the media space is a theme that we touch upon frequently, the infantilization of us as the audience class. Even with the current escalation of tensions between the USA and China through the sanctions around semiconductors, and of course the rather more visually stimulating and sensational story that accompanies the balloon, and indeed the shooting down of the balloon.
Can I tell you about the balloons? Can I tell you a little bit about the balloons?
Yeah.
I asked somebody about it. I have friends, and I said, well, what's going on with the balloons? Of course, they've been there forever. Maybe you could argue they could take photographs of what a satellite can see much better. But basically, the last wave, the unnamed car-like with an American press so full of it, it turns out there's the federal government has a contract with the meteorology department, or whatever it is, weather department at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, and that is one cold place. It's way up there. Also, most of the classes are underground. You go underground to classes. I've spoken there. I know about this firsthand. And over the Arctic Circle everybody flies the polar route from Asia to America, and there's no weather station there. So the university has these little vehicles that goes and reports pilots want to know if there's any unusual weather going on. That's what you have to do. And they are reporters of that information. And that's what was shot down. One of those things was shot down was one of those units that is sent up by a university paid by the government to go over the Arctic Circle and report on, in case there's an extreme wind, I don't know what the cliche is when the wind goes down in a downdraft, and since there's no official station there, who wants to be there to run a weather station? And so they're basically a remote weather station. That's what they shot down. Whether they're going to talk about it in the next couple of weeks, and we put about actually, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars into a new fighter, the F-22, that's coming online. We had one called the F-1. We put 203 billion in to make about 100 of them. About in the 80s, so far 7 exist. It's just money just floats. But we paid a lot of money for the F-22, and its first kill was the first balloon. That one was discovered over Montana, and the pilot, and I'd like to think that he knows exactly what he's doing. When he landed, in World War II, your guys and your Spitfires and us and our P-51s, you took care of every Messerschmitt. You painted on the side a decal for the kills. We did the same in Asia when our P-51s. So the pilot of this F-22 getting the first kill of this plane painted a balloon on the side of his fuselage. I'd love to think he was joking. I don't know that. I know he did it. I don't know what was in the state of mind. But that's what we're reduced now. We've got a kill. We killed a balloon, and that's worth a couple, few $100 billion for a plane.
Yeah, a small price to pay for dispatching some hydrogen and some helium.
It's over the top. It's over the top crazy. That's all I can tell you.
How do you feel then about the context that has to be said frames the Nord Stream pipeline story, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the years of infringement upon former Soviet territories, the 2014...
You're not allowed to say that. How dare you say that there might have been reason behind, the language used, it was done in 1990, the first agreement not to go east.